Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast, the show that brings you latest insights, thought leadership, and stories from across the global mining industry. In today's episode, we have Tim McCutcheon, who's the CEO of Talisman Metals, to talk about building a copper exploration company from the ground up. In this episode, we're going to start with Tim's career and how it shaped to his approach to Talisman, before diving into early field results from the project and what they're seeing on the ground and how it compares to systems like Tizert. We're also going to explore how he evaluates projects, allocates capital in early stages, and builds teams to maximize discovery success. And finally, we zoom out to discuss Sediment-Hosted copper, Morocco's growing role in critical minerals, and how to create value across the portfolio without losing focus. So there's a lot to unpack here. Tim, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Appreciate your time. And as we always start these podcasts off, just wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about your career, a little bit about yourself, how your career's developed over time to what it is today. So I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think the important thing sort of to take into account is that I sort of sat at every side of the table when it comes to the sort of mining business. So I originally started out in this business as an equity analyst. I was institutional investor ranked for the metals and mining sector for EMEA, Middle East, Europe, Africa. When I worked at one of the largest brokerage firms in Europe at the time called Atom Capital. And then from there, essentially at a certain point in my career, I got tired of basically commenting on what other people were doing, particularly in watching people make mistakes and sort of seeing train wrecks, way ahead of time, and decided to sort of play a more active role in doing what I had been essentially just observing. And so in 2006, I left the bank that I was working at and started up a company called DBM Capital, which was really a merchant bank with myself and two other guys. And we did two things. We raised a hedge fund that was peak AUM of about $130 million under management that was dedicated exclusively to the junior mining space. And the other thing we're doing is essentially investment banking deals between junior miners. The key thing in this business is very personality driven. Everyone kind of knows everyone, but you'd be surprised at the barrier to entry, if you will, in terms of getting people's trust and sort of being able to put things together. It's a funny business that way. It's very cliquey. Certainly in Canada, it's extremely cliquey. And so you have an advantage by not being in any particular clique, so you can kind of bridge the gap. And that's something that I did very well. And then that, the long story short, 2008, Lehman Brothers, it was not a good time to be in the asset management business. And one of my clients who I had helped sell a silver deposit to Polymetal at the time, asked me to come in and run their company now that they had sold this major asset, and to basically, make hay with it. And so the fund more or less wound down. I came over and managed this AIM-listed company called Avoca Gold. And we had two gold silver deposits in the Russian Far East, put out resources on them very quickly within a year. One of them within 3 years we sold again to Polymetal. But for the most part, what ended up happening is it wasn't going to be sort of it got stuck, basically, the company. We needed 3-4 kilometers of strike to really make a go at it. We only got 700 meters, did a step out fence, and there was nothing there. So, I stepped down as CEO on good terms with the rest of the owners and the rest of management and moved to Vancouver. And in Vancouver, I really just immersed myself in junior mining, incubation, development, turnaround management. There was a joint venture company with Kinross for gold exploration in Ghana. Then I came in when it was really, I think we had like a month's worth of cash in the bank, and I managed to get it recapitalized, turn around, and within a year sold it. Another time there was a silver deposit in Slovakia called Global Minerals, where Bill Pincus just couldn't really figure out what to do with it. He invited me in. Within a year, I managed to wind down that company orderly, and it's now a quite prominent. It's been rehabilitated and quite prominent player in the TSXV market. And yeah, that's where it is. And then with Talisman, I saw an opportunity where it was a company that had it was trading below cash, like 30 cents on the dollar at the time. And I knew the management, I knew the main shareholders. And to be frank, they were just like, look, we don't have the time or the effort to really deal with this. They're pretty rich people. And they're like, it's not worth our time to do it. But you're more than happy, welcome to have a go at it. The market was pricing it the way it was because it had a lot of legacy issues. Talisman used to be a thing called Evoca Bio. It had all sorts of medical trials that failed in Australia. Those needed to be wound down. Long story short, I bought it in 2024 in the summer, stripped out all of the legacy issues. 2025 laid the foundation for the deal that we just completed to make it Talisman Metals. We closed that deal in January of this year, and so we've been public now for a little over 2 months.
Great. I wonder if you can just give us your thoughts on your obviously first phase of field work at Fougnar and what you're starting to see on the ground there, and what's giving you the most encouragement so far.
Well, the most encouraging thing is the reason why I bought the project in the first place, which is sediment-hosted deposits in this type of environment. Many of the risk factors that you have to spend a lot of money on to get removed are already removed by virtue of the nature of the geology. What does that mean? It means, we know we have copper because it outcrops the surface, so you can see it. We know that the grade of that copper is potentially very commercial, dancing around 1% copper and about an ounce per ton silver. And we know that because we've taken samples of this material and assayed it. We know that given the history of these types of deposits and where we are, that the uniformity of mineralization should be consistent within that sediment layer because it all sort of formed in one go, if you will. And so there's every reason to expect that the grade of the material that outcrops the surface is the same type of grade that's within that layer deeper into the mountainside. So for your audience members, if you look at gold exploration companies, for example, usually before they even get a sniff of gold, they're looking for pathfinder minerals, other things that they associate with gold. So you have to spend a whole lot of money to basically find things that are associated with something that you're actually looking for. But you don't actually have the thing you're looking for. Then you got to spend more money to actually find that. And so there's an additional layer of risk in most other exploration projects that is not present with what Talisman has in Morocco. And so that's the most encouraging thing. And what that means is as you pointed out, we've announced some field work, and that field work, we're able to basically not have to deal with that initial layer of risk, basically, to plan our work. So from a regulatory environment in Morocco, there's a bit of work that's required that we do, which we are doing. We're also adding onto that, to the extent that we can, work that we don't have to do, but work that we want to do. So we're doing extensive IP survey. We're doing extensive TEM survey. We're doing multiple trench sites throughout where the sediments outcrop at surface. We're doing stream sediment sampling to basically get an idea of where this material is coming from as it erodes down into the valleys. And that lays the groundwork for a proper full-scale drill campaign that we plan on having around June or so. So the results of all the work we're doing now should be available in 2 to 3 weeks. And then the processing of those results, target selection, and then hitting it with, a 3,000 meter plus minus drill program in June, that your audience should just keep their eyes peeled for the announcements of that mobilization.
This episode is sponsored by Mining International. In today's market, finding the right mining talent isn't easy. Mining International works closely with mining companies to identify and secure senior and technical professionals through a tailored search approach. If you're hiring or exploring your options, you can contact Rob Tyson via the show notes to start a conversation today.
You're working in the same basin as the Tizert deposit, which is already a known copper system. How much confidence does that give you, and and I suppose what still needs to fall into place to prove you've got something comparable?
Yeah. Well, the thing that gives me the most confidence is the head geologist of that project that managed him is now on my team. So, the guy who knows what to look for is now an employee of Talisman Metals. So that's number one. Number two, the analogy I can give is think, a sediment basin. Think of the Grand Canyon, or think of a chocolate layer cake. And then you took a big spoon and you scooped out, a section of that chocolate layer cake. And one of the layers of frosting, for example, is where that copper is. So that layer of frosting on the east side of this basin is Tizert, right? And it's the same layer of frosting on the west side where we're working. So it's literally the exact same sediment layer that's basically traced out throughout the entire area. So the question then becomes, is that layer of frosting thick enough where we have licenses to be commercially mineable? And that is the risk factor of Talisman, and that's sort of the upside binary, right? Where it works or doesn't work. And that's what we have to test for. But, at the top of your question was, what gives me confidence? Well, the guy who sort of made Tizert a success is on our team. The material that is making Tizert a success is the same material we have. We're only 25 kilometers away. So from the point of view of operating environment, we're not reinventing the wheel here. We know that you can mine successfully in this part of the world. We know you can get to it. There's power, there's road, there's cell phone coverage, there's workforce. All of that is within reasonable distance of where you are. So again, you're not reinventing the wheel. You're not trying to mine something on the ice cap of Greenland or something like that. I mean, this is a tried and true area to build a mine. And so the key is this sediment horizon thick enough to be commercially mineable at scale, right? Now, what's interesting for your readers in your watchers to take into account, though, is the following. The upside scenario is this is a standalone copper mine. And a standalone copper mine that has the capacity to sort of kick out anywhere from 20 to 30,000 tons a year of copper. The going rate for those types of projects right now globally is 400 to 600 million bucks. And there are plenty of comps that are available for people to take a look at. So that's, that's the call option, right? That you're buying when you buy a Talisman stock. The downside protection, though, is that Managem, because they have Tizert, are very keen on consolidating the entire basin in any case. So we're going to find copper mineralization. We know we are because it's outcrops at surface. We know we're going to find some amount of tonnage, no matter what it is. Now, is it as much as a standalone operation needs? That's what we're betting on. But even if it isn't, we have a buyer for the project, which is Managem. So one way or the other, we'll be able to monetize this project or take it through to construction and development and put in place a mine. So that gives me a lot of confidence that, we have the right asset in play to really make Talisman a success.
At this point in the exploration cycle, obviously there's lots of moving parts, geophysics, sampling, drilling. How do you decide where to spend the next pound to give yourself the best chance of obviously a meaningful discovery?
You try to be methodical, which is harder than it sounds. So our game plan is to do this properly. I mean, people ask the question, like, are you trying to build a mine or trying to sell the project? And that question drives me nuts, because if I'm trying to sell the project, at the end of the day, the person who buys it's going to try to build a mine. So it's the same development process, regardless of what your intent is. And what you have to do is you move up the pyramid, if you will, of risk removal. And every step up that pyramid is increasingly more expensive. So the way, when you say, how do you, cost effectively de-risk a project and advance it, is you do the lower cost, broader areas first, and then you narrow down where you're going. So what do I mean by that? First, you do your mapping. Then you do your geophysical work, your TEM surveys, your IP surveys. Then you do your trenching on things that are outcropping things that you see. Then you do your RC drilling, basically to get a sense of, what's actually underground. Then you do your diamond drilling, where you actually get physical core, where you can orient it and get a much better idea of how this thing is oriented underground. And then you do, your met test work, your engineering and everything else. And it's a tried and true process. And pretty much 99% of the companies that try to circumvent that process fail. They might get a little bit of a kick, for even a year or even two. But at some point, if you haven't gotten rid of the risk, it's still there. And risk has a nasty tendency of rearing its head, regardless of what you think and what you're trying to do. And that's how we're going to approach it. So the first pounds that we spend are going to be spent on the maximum bang for buck at this stage in the cycle, which is geophysical surveying and the processing of that data to go to the target selection. That's the next phase that we hope to do in June and July of this year.
You've built out a team with obviously pretty deep technical and operational experience, especially in the obviously discovery and development. But how important is it when you're dealing with obviously effectively untested project?
It's very, look, it's very important. The most important characteristic at this stage is enthusiasm, which isn't necessarily a skill. It's just a personality type, right? Because you don't know, right? And businesses are built on enthusiasm. You can't be an entrepreneur and be pessimistic, right? It just doesn't work. So you have to be enthusiastic. You have to be motivated by what the potential is. That call option that we discussed of, $500 million standalone copper project. That's a lot of money, right? And so you're hoping that you're going to be able to advance your project to that level and make all your shareholders very happy, make the community happy, and basically bring something forward that actually adds a lot of value. So the most important characteristic, frankly, is just enthusiasm and sort of just excitement about the unknown.
Sediment-hosted copper deposits don't always get the same attention as porphyries, but they already make up obviously a meaningful part of the global supply. Do you think the market underestimates this style of deposit?
Yes, yes. The answer is yes. With two hands up. The issue with sediment-hosted copper deposits is they're not sexy. Full stop. You're very rarely going to get the intersections that you get from a porphyry, right? Particularly when you get a spectacular porphyry. So you're never going to get 100 meters of mineralization in a sediment-hosted deposit. It's just pretty much not going to happen. It might, but for the most part, it's never going to happen. What you're going to get is a much more methodical. If it's commercial, you're talking 4 or 5 meters plus, maybe up to 20 meters wide, and you're going to get it over and over and over and over and over again, right? And the nature of sediment-hosted copper deposits is when you find them, because it is a sedimentary layer, if the orientation of that deposit is such that it's amenable to mining, you know exactly what you're pulling out of the ground, right? This is the ore material, this is the waste, and there's really no ambiguity between the two. There's no halo kind of thing going on for the most part. So they get ignored by the market because you don't get that sort of sexy 300-meter intercept that you would from like a Chilean porphyry kind of thing. But in the long term, investors are rewarded because those porphyries that have those sexy intervals, they're $8 billion capex projects that no one can afford to build. So, it's there's a great Russian saying, it's like owning a suitcase without a handle. It's like, it's kind of useless, but you don't want to throw it away. And a lot of the juniors that have these porphyries, and there are many examples, I don't need to give names, they get stuck, right? Because they've spent all this money, they've found something that's exciting and interesting, but they can't figure out how they're going to finance it, taking it to the next step. And so whenever you see these junior mining companies that come out with a bankable feasibility study, and then 6 months later they announce a new drilling program, that's just it's a huge red flag that they're stuck. They can't figure out what to do. And sediment-hosted copper deposits have the luxury, if you will, of being smaller scale and cheaper to build. So Tizert, our neighbor, with Managem owns and operates, that'll be kicking out 40,000 tons of copper a year, mining over 4 million tons of material a year. It costs less than $1 billion to build, all in. So, $1 billion's a lot of money, but $1 billion is sort of a reasonable price tag to do for that scale of a project that has a meaningful impact on global supply. And that's why sediment-hosted copper deposits are so exciting.
Morocco seems to be coming up and more in conversations, obviously around the critical minerals and supply
Yep.
chains. What are you seeing on the ground there that maybe the broader market hasn't really fully caught onto yet?
I think the market has sort of, as you mentioned, gotten like it's on the radar screen for sure. The question is, how do you get exposure, right? So, if you take Canada, for example, you have, hundreds of companies that you can, as an investor, you can say, I want to, pick on that or that or that or that or that to get your exposure to a theme. Same thing in the US, same thing in West Africa for, sub-Saharan West Africa. Morocco, the big issue is that there just aren't a lot of players there. And so it's not just a question of getting exposure to Morocco. It's a question of, well, how do I do that, right? How do I put my chips on the table? Now, Aya, Gold and Silver, which is one of our partners, owns just about 5% of our company. They're by far the biggest player, at least for sort of a Western audience to get investment exposure to. Roughly $4 billion company, trades on the TSX. And then you have a company called Critical Metals, which is sort of a newcomer. They're on the U.S. Stock Exchange. They have a very large market cap, and given sort of where they are in the cycle. But that enthusiasm, if they find what they say they're going to find, it'll be justified. But that's another example to get exposure to. But there aren't many more than that. There's myself. There's a few other juniors, and that's kind of it. So for a country that's as large as Morocco is, and as well endowed geologically as Morocco is, but only very recently has reformed its mining sector to allow companies like mine to be involved, there just isn't the ability for the investor public to pick and choose, as we say, horses they want to ride. And that's changing rapidly. I am part of that change, but we're not there yet. We're really not quite there yet.
You've got a mix of early stage exploration at Fougnar and some really interesting historic work at Tizert. How do you think about building value across obviously multiple projects without losing focus?
Yeah, the key answer there is projects, right? Having 2-3 projects, that's manageable. Having 5-6 projects is not manageable. I don't care what anyone says. There's management's about two things. One is just having money that you can spend on all this stuff, but that's related to having people, right? Who can actually, at the end of the day, companies are people, and people have, lives and families and schedules and 24 hours a day that, basically preclude them from working 26 hours a day or whatever. So yeah, junior mining company that has zero revenue, it is completely dependent on equity issuance to raise cash. And if that company's got 5 projects, then I wouldn't invest in them, frankly. I think it's too much. So the way you keep focus is, if you do get a new project, you get rid of an old one, very quickly. And you focus, of course, on what's the lowest hanging fruit. In our case, Fougnar, and now with the data processing of the Tizert deposit that we bought from Aya, once that sort of data analysis that we inherited from Aya is complete, then you're going to see us focusing on that on the summer, while Fougnar is, it goes in waves, right? You drill, you analyze, you sort of contemplate the results of the analysis, and then you go back and do the next stage of drilling and field work. And in that sort of sin wave of activity and then contemplation, you gather data on another project, basically to keep everyone busy. That's how we intend to run our company.
I wonder if you can just give us an overview of the Moroccan mining industry, obviously for those that may have never visited the region or ever worked in mining there.
Yeah, I think the first thing that will surprise anyone who does visit the place is that it's a very advanced country, and I mean that from the point of view of civil service, infrastructure, just having all of the benefits of being a properly organized state, if you will. Societally, at least from what I have seen, it seems to be a pretty harmonious place. It's got different ethnic groups, and it's got different people, and the whole gamut of wealth to poverty and everything else. But in general, it seems like a well-managed place. If you walk around the main cities, you feel safe. You'll see every manner of Western dress up to full sort of Middle Eastern dress, and they seem to co-inhabit this space perfectly fine. There's also every service and product that you can imagine is available there. From an infrastructure point of view, the roads would make most places in the eastern United States or Canada weep in terms of envy. Incredibly wonderful roads. They're a co-host to the World Cup coming up, I think, in 2030. So there's a lot of money being poured into sort of sprucing up the place and building out infrastructure. There's power lines everywhere. It's fascinating. Even in the middle of the desert, there'll be a big power line going overhead. Your cell phone works everywhere, which I can't say the same for Canada, unfortunately. So from an infrastructure point of view, and of course the ports, I mean, it's a maritime country, right? Both on the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. So there are plenty of access points to the outer world, both through ports and through world-class airports. I mean, I've been to the Casablanca airport and the Marrakesh airport, and they're both world-class big airports, and the ports as well. So from that point of view, it's a lovely place to work to get things done. From the point of view of the legal framework, they basically, from what I've sort of been able to gather, it's basically had a committee that reviewed successful mining codes from other jurisdictions and more or less implemented it, word for word. There are a few things they don't allow: large stake and claim type license blocks. So you kind of have to know what you're going after before you go after it. You can't stake out, a 200 square kilometer block of land and then hope to find something on it. You're limited by 4x4 kilometer license sizes. So you have to do your groundwork first before you go out and get a license, because much more narrow land package. And in terms of the mining scene in general, I mean, the main mining product of Morocco is phosphate products for fertilizers. It's like the main revenue earner for the country, from the point of view of export revenue and everything else. It is the dominant player. The state company that runs that operation is a dominant player, just economically within the country for sure. Copper, silver production, other mining things are starting to pick up in terms of their footprint in the economy, but they're still quite small. The key thing about Morocco is that mining in general is not a new activity. It's just it's never really been done in a large-scale organized way, the way it's being done now. Managem, of course, is the main player. Managem, for people who don't know, it's not a state company. It's a company that's majority owned by a trust where the beneficiary is the royal family and the king, but it is public. The minority stake of it's public on the local Casablanca exchange. So it has that interaction. It has, corporate governance and everything else by virtue of being a public company. They're the main player. And then you have Aya, which is sort of the main foreign player. And then you have a bunch of other folks. But small-scale mining has been prevalent for decades. It still goes on. If you look at our website, you'll see pictures of copper-bearing material just coming out of the mountainside, and that gets mined all the time, all over the country. And then people crush it, and then either they make a con locally, or they just sent out, 3-4% copper crushed material as feedstock to someone else. And in some cases, it's Managem. So mining isn't new. Sort of Western organized larger operation mining is new, and that's where Talisman hopes to sort of make its inroads.
And lastly, what's the short to medium term outlook for Talisman over the sort of next 12 to 18 months?
As we discussed, right, that having a focus on projects and that sine wave of activity where you're drilling, collecting data, analyzing data on one project, that crew is out drilling on another project, and then you're going back and forth between collecting data and analyzing data to the point where you have resource calculations for the projects, and then you pull in the engineering and the metallurgical work to basically firm that up into a PEA type study, and then you go to feasibility study. So your listeners should basically focus on Fougnar mobilization and drilling over the summer, the assays of that coming back in the fall. During the fall, when those assay results are back and being analyzed, we'll be mobilizing on Tizert, doing field work there. and then having those assays come back and the results of that analysis in the fourth quarter of this year. So back and forth with that. And the immediate time frame, we are in the field in Fougnar. In the next 2 weeks or so, we should have data out on the geophysical work that we've done, and it'll be really exciting to share that with the market. And then of course, I'm an ex-banker, right? There are always things percolating in the background.
Yeah, great. Tim, really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for telling us all about Talisman Metals, obviously mining in Morocco, and obviously wish you well with the drill program ahead. If our audience wants to reach out to you, obviously follow the story, obviously receive those news releases of obviously drill results. How can they go about doing that, and what social media platform channels are you on?
Website talismanmetalsplc.com. Our ticker is TLM. We trade on the London Stock Exchange on the AIM board. Those are the best places to look. We have a LinkedIn channel. You can subscribe and get updates through that. And frankly, it's a small organization. I am available. So write to me. You can do that on the info at talismanmetals.com email address on our website. I'll be more than happy to answer questions of people if they send them in.
Yeah, great. We include all those in the show notes of companies for easy access and for our listeners to reach out to you and obviously follow the story. So thank you again for your time. Hopefully you can come on maybe later this year or next year and give us an update.
Super. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, great. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. As always, appreciate your continued support. Please keep sharing these episodes far and wide, not just within the region of, say, Africa, but across the world. We want to educate the mining industry in obviously various countries, various commodities. So yeah, please keep sharing these episodes far and wide. Thank you for listening, and until next time, happy mining.